Okay, good evening, everybody. If you can hear me, if you've connected to the audio, we're just going to give everyone a moment to come in from the waiting room. And for everyone who's connected to the audio, hello and good evening. Thanks for joining us today. If anyone wants to turn on their camera, we would be super excited to see all of you in the audience. Myself and my co-hosts and all of the other panelists will have their cameras on the whole time as well. Thank you. I'm so happy to see everybody this evening. Thank you for everybody who's able to turn on their camera. Okay, I'm just giving it one more second for everyone to come out of the waiting room. And it looks like we are all set. So again, for those of you who just logged in, whoever wants to turn on their camera, we would be happy to see all of you for this panel discussion and certainly for the breakout rooms in the second half of the event. Thank you for joining us this evening on Industry Non-Bench Careers for PhDs. This is a panel discussion and networking event hosted by Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center's Career and Professional Development Office, of which I am the director. I'm Thalyana Stathis, and also the co-hosts for this event are INet NYC and STEMPeers. So I'm really pleased to introduce our 6 panelists for this evening. If you had joined us in last week's session, we had panelists who were in a variety of scientist bench careers. And so in today's event, we are having this session on panelists in a variety of non-bench careers in industry. So without further ado, we have Boaz Aronson, who is an Associate Director of Oncology Early Global Development at AstraZeneca. Hi, Boaz, thanks for joining us this evening. Okay, Francesca Cavallo, who's a Senior Biomarker and Diagnostic Liaison at Bristol Myers Squibb. Thanks for joining us, Francesca. Third, we have Parthiv Kant Chowdhury, who is a Senior Manager of QA and Gene Therapy at PTC Therapeutics. Hi, Parthiv, thanks for being here this evening. Okay, our 4th panelist is Helen Kang. She's a Manager of Regulatory Affairs Strategy at Regeneron. Hi, Helen, nice to see you. Okay, 5th panelist is Avnish Kapoor, Senior Director of Strategy and Business Development, also at Bristol Myers Squibb. Hi, Avnish. Thanks for being here today. And last but not least, Parag Mahanti, who is the Investor Relations Director at Novartis. Hi, Parag. Thanks for joining us again. Okay, a few quick notes before I pass things over to my co-hosts from INet and STEMPeers. And again, if you just joined us, I'm Thalyana Stathis. I direct the Career and Professional Development Office at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. The audience this evening, you can see we have quite a large group. And if you had joined us last week, what we thought was effective with this large group is for you to utilize the chat during the panel discussion. If you have a specific question for a specific panelist, so please type in their name and then type in their question. And the panelists will be keeping an eye on the chat during the panel discussion to see if there are any questions directed to them that they can type in quick answers to. So we're going to have parallel conversations. We'll have the panel discussion. Also, you can type in some questions in the chat as well that the panelists can type in short answers to. So we have people from MSK, other New York City institutions represented by INet, NYC, and also the group Grow Biotech, and students and postdocs as well across the country and abroad from the group STEMPeers. So we just want to have an understanding of everybody who's in the audience for tonight. Again, you're welcome to keep your camera on for the entire portion of the panel discussion and the breakout rooms. The breakout rooms will start at 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So that's going to be an opportunity for you to have conversations in a smaller group with any of the panelists you'd like to speak with. And so we are recording this event, but we're going to be sharing the panel discussion portion of the event on YouTube pages from INet and STEMPeers after the event is over. So you can always view that portion of the event again on their YouTube pages. And finally, please follow up with the panelists on LinkedIn to ask additional questions and have more in-depth conversations after today's event. With that, I would like to turn things over to Sohini Dutta, who's at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, and she's also part of STEMPeers. She's just going to say a few words about the group, and she and Sinhuja Devanapalli, who is at Columbia University and also part of INet NYC, they're going to be running the panel discussion. So over to Sohini.
Thank you, Taliana, and welcome everybody to the panelists and also the attendees. Very excited to be here. I'm going to share just one slide going briefly over the last 6 years of STEMPeers. Let me see over here. Are you all able to view the slide?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. All right, so STEMPeers is a nonprofit organization which was initially started in 2015 as an Indian Institute of Science alumni group to help academicians and STEM professionals support each other in their academic life or in their career growth. In 2016, the organization started several initiatives, which included their first SciComm platform known as Club SciRai. It also expanded help as far as immigration issues are concerned. They added or introduced what we now call as local chapters, so that STEM professionals within different cities in different parts of the world can come together and have chats about their professional life, get some support and or advices. And it also added a coffee chat for a one-on-one advice. In 2017, they introduced the first career mentorship program known as Gurukul. And we just finished we just started our spring 2022 cohort. It's got a big group of mentors who have already transitioned to industry to give advice or career advice to those who are interested in transitioning out of academia. It started its second SciComm platform known as the STEMPeers newsletter. It was officially registered as the nonprofit organization and also hosted the first first conference in USA in Boston, which then expanded to the first conference in Europe in 2018, and also introduced the third SciComm platform, the STEM Times, and a new initiative known as Women in STEM. In 2019, the SciComm platforms continued expanding, and there were two new ones, which is Medness and Kirki, and also introduced STEMPeers Fellowship. So basically to support STEM professionals to develop a particular skill, which can be beyond their academic career. And in 2020, it added its sixth SciComm platform, the STEMPeers Editor's Choice. And also since our group was largely graduate students or postdocs or professionals who are already in the industry, we also added the undergraduate STEMPeers, and they've done a wonderful job. They have their own SciComm platforms, own mentorship programs, and there was mental health support that was added along with the diversity and outreach programs. And all these endeavors continued in 2021. I'm not going to go over the whole list, as you can see over here, but there were collaborations with the STEM Advocacy Institute, with the Journal of Science Policy and Governance, with the Mothers in Science. And I do want to mention that a lot of these names that you see over here were recipients of the STEMPeers Fellowship Program. And these endeavors continue till 2022. So to those who are interested in joining the platform, we have a presence in LinkedIn as well as Facebook, and I can share the links of both of those so that you can join and see the discussions that are going on in the group. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I guess hand it over to Sindhuja to start the panel discussion.
Awesome. Thanks for that introduction. That was super useful. I'm sure a lot of us can gain something from joining STEMPeers. But really excited for our panel today. And so for the first part, we will talk about the current positions of our panelists and just discuss what their jobs are like. So my first question to the panelists is, could you describe to us what your main day-to-day responsibilities are in your current job? And how do you think your career in the academic world prepared you for your current position? And then was there any additional industry experience or other training that you did to transition into this type of non-bench career in industry? So let's start with Boaz.
Okay, hi everyone. Great to be here, and happy to talk about my experiences in industry and the transitions that I've made. So yeah, as for this first question, those were actually quite a few questions all at once, but I'll just guess I'll start with the day-to-day work. So I'm in early clinical development. So I made a transition from working in the lab to doing clinical science in industry. And in that capacity, I'm responsible for a large phase 2 clinical trial that investigates IO treatment combinations. It's a very big trial for a phase 2 trial. It takes place in 8 different countries and 40 different hospital sites, and it has a couple of hundred patients. So that's a lot for phase 2. Also, I'm responsible for compounds that are in the preclinical pipeline and that are making their way towards clinical trials. And then the closer they come to clinical trials, the more clinical development gets involved in bringing out advice and in developing a clinical developing plan. So that's what I'm responsible for. On the day-to-day, I'm a lot involved with many different groups in the company. AstraZeneca is a very large international global company, so you work in global virtual teams, so everything is almost virtual. And a big part of the day goes into simply running the trial, taking care of all kinds of issues related to the protocol, whether patients can be included or should be excluded, what needs to be done with certain things that are not directly clear, in managing a lot of people on the team. There are roughly 40 people that I'm directly involved with that are on the study team. So that gives an indication probably on what it is like to work not only in clinical science, but also doing that in a very large company. And then what were the other questions that you were asking, Sindhuja?
Yeah, so
Sorry.
could you tell us how you're, like, what kind of training you did to transition into
The training. Yeah, so I can't say that I did specific training, but I think one thing to keep in mind when you transition to industry is that industry is a rather large concept. You have a lot of different functions in industry and a lot of different ways in which you can go. And for me, I really wanted to see if I could find a position where basic science and clinical science started to overlap, because I have a medical background. I'm an MD, PhD, and I did basic science for a very long time, for years. I worked on stem cell genetics, worked in GI, doing epigenetics of the gastrointestinal tract. And I also worked in clinic, and I wanted to see if I could bring all those skills together. So for me, it made kind of sense to go in the direction of early clinical development, where the science is still very pervasive, but you really start to go to clinical trials for the first time with a certain molecule. And I was already going in that direction a little bit during my postdocs. I did a postdoc at Weill Cornell, and I had a translational science grant for 2 years that was attached to a translational science program, in which was meant for people that had a lot of experience in basic science. So that already sort of indicated where I wanted to go. And I did a couple of other courses, statistics courses and those kind of things, clinical science courses. You have all of those available at Cornell and at MSK as well. So it really helped me to really look around and see what kind of resources there were that could help me with the transition. And then I also reached out to people like Taliana, who could connect me with people who were already working in industry, and then I could ask them what they did and how the transition was for them, and that already taught me a lot about the type of work that you do and how you can best make the transition. So I hope that clarifies it a little bit.
Awesome, thank you. Francesca, could you go next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for inviting me. Actually, it's not the first time that I'm like doing, this amazing networking with Taliana and previously with other person that was in her position. So I'm Francesca Cavallo. I'm the biomarker diagnostic liaison from BMS. And so one thing that I would like to highlight that, the team of the MSLs cover different territories. So one thing that I want to kind of share with you that if you are pursuing in this career, you have to keep in mind also the territory that you want to cover. So sometimes it might request a lot of travels and also relocations. So right now I'm covering New York City and Northern New Jersey, and I was committed to stay in New York City over here. So I did a postdoc at MSK. Also, I graduated, I'm Italian, so I did my half PhD in Italy, half PhD here, and then I continued as a postdoc at MSK. So I was really attached to New York, so I wanted to stay here, and I tried to find a position here specifically covering New York City. But if you are open, I think also to move in other territories, it gives you like the flexibility maybe to find like quicker and faster, a position in MSL, as an MSL. So the field medical, because we are under the medical affair, but we are field. So we are basically based into the field. So what we do on our daily basis is to interact with our, I would say, called customers, although even not customers because we are not selling, but I would like to say that we are selling science in a way, are our thought leaders. And the thought leaders are most likely not PI that you're working with actually right now, are pathologists in my case, because my team is a biomarker diagnostic. So we are really focusing in our customers are researchers, PI, and also pathologists per se. And on our daily basis, we interact with those thought leaders in order to understand where the field is going and how the BMS strategy can, I would say, change or modify based on what the science is going. And so basically what we do, we interact with our thought leaders, get their insight and sentiments about our pipelines, about our approvals, or simplicity like our presentations that we usually at ASCO, ACR, there are some releases about new data. So understand the sentiment based on the data. So we're sharing as a resources this type of information with the thought leaders and understand what they think about it. So one of the things that really helped me, my PhD background, so going to the questions like how the academic career prepared me, it's because if you don't have a solid understanding of the disease state, or for example, of biomarkers or clinical trials, it's kind of really difficult to have this conversation with high thought leader profile. So the background that you have and are currently have doing your postdoc and your PhD will really help you in get the foot on the door for this type of job. So it's really important your career, the career that you had, that you are having in MSK or in Cornell. I mean, the postdoc is really important because it's the foundation that basically allows you to move in the role as an MSL. Because I think the first thing that you have to do is like understanding where you want to go. And then if you understand, if you want to be an MSL, you can acquire the skills that are important for this type of career. So my suggestion is talk, as Borat said, with people that they are currently doing this type of job and what kind of skills you have to acquire for that. And, MSK, because I was a pure MSK postdoc, it gives you a lot of opportunity, not only in this setting, but also as a, kind of stretch project that you might, have during your postdoc that allows you to move to the next step.
Awesome, thank you. How about you, Helen?
Hi, everyone. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. Hi, so I'm a manager at Regeneron in the Global Regulatory Strategy Group. So my official title is a manager, but basically what I do is I'm a regulatory liaison. And I don't know about you guys here, but all through my grad school and postdoc, I don't think I had heard about what regulatory affairs were, or, who goes into that field, what it's about. And to be honest, I got into Regeneron actually as a regulatory writer. And even in my first few months, I don't think I really understood what they did. But basically, I think this sort of ties into what Boaz was talking about clinical development. So one big role for the liaison, obviously, is serving as a liaison between any kind of pharmaceutical company and the regulators. So that's, EMA and the EU, FDA here. So you're the liaison, but what excites me the most, I think, about this position is that you get to sort of help develop you're leading the development of like the registrational strategy. So what does that mean? So I think to kind of call back to what Boaz was talking about before. So for example, when he is going to write a study protocol for the phase 2 study, then regulatory strategy can contribute and sort of lead the discussion and kind of look at it from the perspective of how can this lead to a registration or basically filing for an application to get the drug approved for marketing. So that is sort of a big part of being a regulatory liaison. And, there's a lot of other aspects to it. Like, I think everybody here in pharma, those are the big things, but, there's like a million other things that you have to, do as like, sort of like the subject matter expert in that field. And part of that for regulatory is kind of keeping up to date on, what's happening with other clinical trials, what the competitive landscape's like. And of course, obviously, you need to be the expert in what the latest regulations and guidelines are in different areas so that you can, advise the clinical team and all the different functional areas on how you can optimize basically your registrational strategy. So that's a bit of what I do as a liaison. So how did my career prepare me for my current career? So I think obviously people have talked about just having that deep understanding of science and being able to pick things up really quickly. That's obviously very important. But I think I personally didn't really appreciate the softer skills that you kind of have to develop in grad school until I had to do this out here. It's obviously, we do a lot of writing in grad school and as postdocs, and that really is, I feel I can't really think of any functional area where that wouldn't be helpful in a pharmaceutical industry environment where you have to kind of work matrixed with other functional areas all the time. So it might not be writing a manuscript, but it's so important to be able to communicate your thoughts and what you understand about the science, the strategy, all of that very clearly. So that's super helpful. And another thing I wanted to tell you guys is just by the fact of going through grad school and your postdoc, it requires a tremendous amount of resilience and the ability to troubleshoot and just keep going. And that is very helpful. And I didn't really appreciate how much your careers taught you that in grad school and postdoc. So that's definitely something that's in your corner for you to access when you go to look for that career. Just one last thing. So regulatory affairs, I feel like it might be a bit more difficult for you to kind of break into rather than say like a bench position in a pharmaceutical industry. But one thing I wanted to highlight about a lot of pharmaceutical companies, Regeneron is my first pharmaceutical company, but I think it's generally true talking to other colleagues who's come from other companies is that they really not encourage, but they are very permissive of people kind of finding out what their strengths are, what their passions are, what they're good at, what they're really excited about, and kind of allowing that sort of like horizontal movement. So it might be something that you kind of need to get into pharmaceutical industry first and then move around for, but that's another thing that you want to keep in mind that, yeah, there's a lot of horizontal movement. And if you're really interested in the industry, maybe the best way for you to learn all the different functional areas and how you might fit into one the best is for you to just get your foot in and then move around. So that's an option. And that's the way I ended up in regulatory affairs.
Great, thank you. How about you, Parthiv?
Sure. So first of all, very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. So I will just like to give a brief background on my scientific education and then how I transitioned into this current role. So I basically did my PhD from Singapore, National University of Singapore in biomedical engineering and working with cancer cell lines and all. And then I landed up in New York and I was in Columbia University with my postdoc. And there I was working mainly with the immune cells and T cells to be specific. And then for my first position, actually, I transitioned. It was not industry, but I transitioned into the MSK in a clinical trial facility that manufactures the cells for cell and gene therapy. So there I was working as a quality control supervisor, and that was my first non-academic job, I will say. So there, and from then I transitioned into my current position, that is working as part of quality assurance in PTC Therapeutics. So I will just like to highlight regarding how what kind of training was required for transitioning into a quality job. So first of all, quality jobs is very difficult to get an internship kind of thing, like a summer internship working for 2-3 months, because there is a lot of confidentiality and regulation involved surrounding the documents that are being reviewed or that the documents are going around. So it's very difficult in some way to get an internship kind of thing. So what helped me for my case is that since I was working as a quality control supervisor, so my analytical testing experience was helped to me. So I basically used to know the techniques that was used for testing the product or the cell and gene therapy product that the manufacturing facility was making, say, for example, qPCRs or the ELISAs or the different kind of fax instruments. So there my analytical skills helped me in basically getting the jobs. Of course, soft skill is very much important. So while working with MSK for this QC supervisor position, I got to know about the quality stuff of things, because in academically, normally people don't get exposed to what the quality of the product is and all the regulations on the things such as that. So basically during my QC supervisor position, I learned about the quality aspect of the manufacturing and the clinical trials and all, and that helped me in getting my current position. So that was the path, I will say, because just jumping, I cannot think just from my postdoc I could land up to my current job. So because there was gaps in between. And so the next question was basically about the day-to-day activity. So basically in quality, what we are involved is that, say, for example, a clinical trial, whether it's a clinical product or commercial product, and the process or the product is manufactured. So every time we need input from the quality on whether the safety and the quality of the product that will be administered to the patients are maintained or not. So at each step of the process, starting from, say, when the reagent or the raw material is purchased, that reagent need to be qualified. Second, the instrument that need to be used for this manufacturing process need to be qualified, properly maintained with time and calibrated before the manufacturing is done. Second, whichever methods or the protocol is being used need to go through an approval round between cross-functional teams with regulatory folks, SMEs involved. Of course, quality is generally the last person giving the approval, and then only the thing can be implemented. So there is a lot of regulation and control in the process on how a drug can be manufactured, if it is for a first in human or a clinical trial kind of thing. So basically our day-to-day activities is very much in decision making. Say, for example, some assays did not went as planned, like regularly happens in a PhD or postdoc lab. So what to do? Because in a quality environment, we cannot just throw away the sample and go for a retest. We need to document each and every step of it. Even if the result did not meet what we are expecting, we need to give justifications, like why it did not meet. So there actually being a PhD and the postdoc background helps, because it helps in framing those justifications from a scientific rationale. And every time we need the scientific justification on whatever we are doing, and this need to be written down. So that's what basically it's mainly a decision-making position, I will say. And that's what we mean by quality oversight, like whichever steps did not occur as planned with the manufacturing process, we need to document it with proper justification and cross-functional team alignment. And also, of course, as I mentioned, reviewing of documents and from instruments to reagents to procedures. So all the reviews, those are very routine part of a quality assurance job. And of course, we are also involved in the filing that with the regulatory agencies such as FDA and EMA for Europe. And then also the quality input is needed. So reviewing those kind of regulatory paperwork is also part of the regular day-to-day activity, I will say. And so what from the next question was what from the PhD and postdoc days help in my current position? I will say, first of all, the scientific thinking, because doing a PhD and the postdoc teaches us how to think in a rational manner and come up with scientific judgment. So that scientific thinking is helpful very much. And second, of course, the analytical things, because if the person is working in the same field, say, for example, I was working in the same field, so I know how the things work from the technical part also. So it helps in troubleshooting things. Suppose the assay or the instrument did not work properly, to come up with reasoning and give suggestions on how it might work. And of course, as Helen mentioned, soft skills is very integral part of any industrial position. So first of all, even with soft skill, I would like to highlight the most important thing is communication. And especially with COVID, that skill is even more important because most people are virtual. So we are sitting in front of our computer screen. We don't make those in-person interactions. So communication, whether it's a video call or a chat message or email, whichever way it is very important in how you communicate, because every time we are communicating with other people, it's not like a PhD thing. We have our own projects. We are doing it according to our own wish. So every time in industry, we are collaborating with people. We are working in a matrix and interacting with people, a lot of different people from different field of that area. So communication is very important in this role. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the details on the job. So Parag, could you go next and tell us a little bit about your job?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey everybody, Parag Mahanti here. It's fun to be here because back in 2015 and 2016, I was one of the co-founding members of CSG, which has since become STEMPeers. So this is quite interesting to back in that panel. Very quickly, came from India, finished my PhD here in the US in 2013. First job after PhD was consulting, did that for 2.5 years. Then I went into equity research, did that for 2.5 years. And then I joined Novartis at the end of 2018, initially in pharma market access strategy. I'll quickly define what that is in a bit. And then I moved into pricing and contracting. And then currently I'm in investor relations, right? So the reason why I wanted to give the quick background is because back in 2013 or 2012, when I was finishing my PhD, if somebody said, will I be an investor relations person in a pharma company? No, I wouldn't have thought about that. There is very few direct skills that I would take away from my PhD into my current job. Of course, the basic fundamentals of any education is communication, is understanding how to think, is understanding how to write. Those things are true for a PhD as well. On my day-to-day job in my PhD, I was taking NMR samples. I don't use the word NMR at all. I have to count how many times I would have used in the last 5 years. So that answers the third question that we had about how does my skills in academia transition. So to the second question of what do I do every day? Investor relations, essentially, as the term suggests, we talk to investors. Our job is to tell the story of the company to the investors so that they invest. Now, the bigger the company, the larger number of investors, the more the interest, and the more you have to know. So Novartis, of course, all of you know, is a big pharma company, one of the top 5 pharma companies out there in terms of revenue, and in terms of number of products, number of innovations. We also have NIBR. So NIBR is like a big pipeline engine for our R&D. NIBR stands for Novartis Institute for Biomedical Research, just in case. And so on a daily basis, we are basically trying to remember a lot of information that we have so that we can answer these questions, right? So questions will, of course, change from time to time. Right now, with the conflict that's going on in Eastern Europe, we will get questions on that. Otherwise, generally, I mean, some questions on that, but otherwise, general questions are about the company. How is the company doing? What do we expect for specific products? If you're going to launch a product, then what do we expect about the launch? If a product somehow, didn't get a question from the FDA, then why did the FDA ask that question? And what was the discussions happening when we gave the first filing of the product? And then how are we selling the product? And the reason why I'm saying all of this is because everything that you heard so far, right, from Boaz, from Parthiv, from Helen, these are all different parts of the pharma company, right? Sales, medical affairs, quality control, regulatory, and the company is responsible for all of it. And so we get asked about all of it, right? So like, I need to know the FDA interactions that we have had that we can make public. I need to know if certain sales discussions are happening that we are hearing from the doctors, what are we hearing, right? So of course, we will not tell them or we are not communicating, or let me take a step back. We need to keep a balance. Any spokesperson for the industry, for the company, we need to keep a balance of how much we can say that is balancing the amount of information that we can give out competitively and the amount of information that is allowed to be given out, financially, right? So what do I do on a daily basis? I talk, I make slides, I write up documents. This is basically kind of the very, very simplified version, right? What am I writing? Answers for people. What am I reading? Answers from people. So I'm also talking to internal, because me as a person who have just joined the company for 3 years, you cannot possibly remember everything about the company that has been there for years and decades, right? So you need to ask other people the question, which is where personnel management comes in. So let me quickly dip into that part of what are the skill sets that you need. In consulting, you need good analytical skills, which you will get from your PhD. Also writing, with some part you will get from PhD, but not a lot, because writing has to be much more succinct than in PhD. Then consulting and finance requires 2 other things: slide development, which some of us might know in PhD, but imagine the slide development process is flipped. In PhD, you start with intro, show the entire thing, and then give the conclusion. In business, it's the opposite. You start with the conclusion and then start saying why that is. Pyramid Principle is a book that might be important. So you need to pick up presentation skills and essentially how to tell a story. Finance, both equity research and consulting, requires some bit of finance understanding. You don't need a training for that, but you can watch YouTube videos to understand what NPV is, what DCF is. I can answer questions on chat if necessary. And then finally, when you come into pharma, most pharma jobs, if they're not research adjacent, right, which is what Boaz mentioned, which is some parts of regulatory might be research adjacent, you can make that transition straight out of a research job, because it's not a bench job, but it is utilizing a lot of your research understanding. But most of the pharma, like I think Francesca mentioned, that the farther you are away from actual core science, the more stuff that you have to prove, or you have to give evidence that you are able to. So like sales, marketing, policy, many of those jobs, you need to have proven communication skills. And yes, you can give talks and presentations, but they don't, unfortunately, consider those as communication skills. So I know I talked very fast, but I wanted to give the overview of the career journey. I'll yield my time.
Great, thank you. And finally, Avnish, could you talk a little bit about your job?
Yeah, I'll try to be quick because I'm running short of time. So I have a PhD like most of the panel, and I have a postdoc. And my first transition was actually to a bench position. So I started out at NIBR in Cambridge, and then slowly moved to leading a group in oncology drug discovery. And at that point, I think I had 2 paths to sort of stay on that path, but I was getting very excited about sort of big picture strategy and and corporate development, and I was exposed to a lot of those at different parts of my time at Nibber and Lilly. And so that's when I sort of made the jump to a non-bench position where, but I was exposed to what I was going to expect there because I was involved in a lot of due diligences and so from a research perspective. So right now I'm in the strategy and business development group at BMS, where the group I'm in takes care of all licensing, M&A, collaborations for BMS. My specific role is focused on oncology, but there are my counterparts in immunology and cardiovascular, and I think business development is a big part of any big pharma. In fact, if you do a survey, most pharmas will say that up to 50% of the pipeline could come from external innovation going forward. Companies vary slightly up and down. So the BD roles are highly sort of significant part of a significant way to contribute to the company's portfolio. I was doing that by working in a lab when I was at Nibber. However, now I'm doing the same exact thing, but just not through my own research, but rather the work of other biotechs or other medium-sized biotechs who we end up acquiring. Let's see. What prepared me for this role was clearly my sort of skill set of being able to synthesize information, articulate it to audience during my PhD and postdoc. As most of these roles, as you've heard today, these are extremely external facing roles. You are the face of the company and you are the face of your organization to very senior leadership. You are talking, you're presenting to the CEO, you're presenting to the board for any of these deals. So you do have very high visibility internally and externally. So you really need to be great at being able to, like Parag said, synthesize slides in a very succinct manner. There's no more, this is a data dump. You really need to be very, very clever at telling a story. And so I would say most of my day-to-day is interacting with pretty much any function in the company, right from payer access to alliance management to investor relations. So it is you really are interacting internally with everyone to put together a story on why should we be licensing this opportunity, what are the financial terms that make sense, and really BD, like most of these jobs, is extremely cross-functional, where you sort of hold hands with everyone and bring something forward. And the last thing I'll say is I think this role is a little bit difficult to transition from just a straight PhD. You do need some bit of understanding of how these things operate in an industry. A lot of people start because most of my peers have a consulting background, or they were in a venture, or they were in industry and they transitioned to industry in a non-bench position after a few years. Yep, that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Avnish. So the next question, I'd like to target a couple of the panelists to address. So Helen, first, could you tell us what are the growth options for your type of role at your company, and then what career path are you envisioning for yourself? And could you give us a really brief answer for this so that we can continue to ask more questions? Thanks.
Yep, sure. So I mean, regulatory affairs, it's really pretty straightforward. I think the growth comes from sort of like in terms of different types of projects that you get to lead. So for example, right now I'm leading like discussions to potentially go for orphan designation for a baby molecule. Whereas, 5 years from now, I'll be putting together the marketing application, after having run phase 3 and helping to design that trial. So that's sort of like a very straightforward, I guess, like a vertical growth path if I were to stay in regulatory. And I really like regulatory for a lot of different reasons. So for now, my plan is to just stay here and just learn more. There's just so much to learn. So that's my plan. Was there a third question? Sorry. Can you remind me?
Yeah, I think it was more along lines of where you were envisioning yourself, but I think you answered that.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Avnish, could you answer that question?
Growth prospects. So you can rise up the ladder, and most people would transition off into a biotech, into a VP or a SVP or a CBO, Chief Business Officer kind of role. From this, a lot of other people go to investment banking if they still have the juice left in them to sort of try the investment banking route. I would say not anyone goes back to research, so that is almost never going to happen. Some of them get into industrial relations, corporate strategy. So there's a lot of sort of paths you could take from this role, just because you get exposed to pretty much every single function in the company. You're not an expert at everything, but you know how the whole sort of music is played, by all these different instruments in the company. So because you have such a vast line of sight, you are pretty, especially if you're coming from a pharma, if you can figure that part out in a pharma, you can contribute in lots of different ways to any sort of business. Some people even move out of science and do something else. So there's lots of possibilities.
Nice, that's really good to hear. Boaz, could you answer that?
Yeah, sure. I think now in line with what other people are saying, I think that the growth possibilities are really diverse. It's a bit of a generic thing to say, but a career in industry is really a journey. You start in one position and you can grow vertically. So in my case, in early clinical development, that would mean that you can decide to take on more projects, more larger projects. You can progress to a clinical lead. You can decide to go more towards management and governance, and lead a group. Eventually, you can also go to other parts of the company, such as late phase, where you are in charge of phase 3 clinical trials, which is more about bringing a drug to market and dealing with regulatory affairs, or to completely different kinds of roles in the company. It's really up to you, and possibilities are kind of limitless.
That's really exciting.
It is.
Thank you. Thanks for that. So now I'd like to pass it on to Sohini to discuss the remaining questions during this panel discussion.
Thank you, Sindhuja. So we are headed close to our breakout rooms, but we want to go with a couple more questions. So the next question, some of these they're going to overlap with some of the previous discussions we have had and some in the chat box too. But the question is, how do you prepare to be a strong candidate when you're applying or interviewing for your first job in industry? And if you could talk briefly about how the application process or the interview process went, that you went through, and when you were on the job market, how were you able to show that you were the right fit for this job? And also, I see there was a question and Avnish did answer that, but just very briefly, could you say how, what are the opportunities for international students when they want to work in the USA, like how to navigate that part? And I'm going to ask this. Avnish, do you want to take this over?
So for the visa, I think, is that a question? The international students' perspective? Sorry.
Yeah, so there was, no, there was, how do you prepare to be a strong candidate when you're applying for first job outside the industry? And if you could talk briefly about what your application and industry process, interview process.
Obviously, so it obviously depends on the position. If it's I assume that most positions coming out of PhD and postdoc have to be closely related to what you were working on when you were a PhD or a postdoc. So love for science and be able to communicate science is a big part of really the story. You want to come across as someone who's excited about, who's not bashing his postdoc boss or his PhD boss and how he was terrible. You want to tell a story that how you are an easy person to work with, and you have had a great experience, and you want to bring some of that excitement into industry. I think I feel that question of why industry is probably not that important. Everyone, now there's a lot of visibility to sort of being in industry, but I do think that you want to tell them how you like working in matrix teams and bringing your expertise to the table. And maybe last point about the, I would say the visa and sort of any of those logistics are becoming less of a problem. I personally have hired people who've had, who didn't have a green card or a O1. I think as long as there's a good candidate, especially in a pharma, it would be very different in a biotech, which have limited resources. But in a reasonable sized pharma or a big size or a medium sized biotech, there's a lot of flexibility. The manager will, talent is very limited these days. There are biotechs in every corner in Cambridge. So talent is so important that the companies will try to stretch themselves to get you if they like you. So make yourself marketable. That's the key.
Thank you, Avnish. That does sound pretty hopeful. Francesca, do you want to answer this question next?
Yeah, so basically it always depends on what kind of position you're applying for. I can speak about the MSL positions. I think the communication skill is a key. Be concise on scientific messages that you want especially during the interview. You want to communicate. So basically for the MSL position and, in the briefing room, I can answer to, specific questions, but it was most likely a presentation of, a clinical trials. And I would always suggest, to present something that the candidate is very familiar. So if they were participating, in some studies, like clinical studies, like during their postdocs, or also can be just kind of also description of the PhD thesis, for example, that highlighting, for example, for my position was the biomarker component. So I didn't have any experience, in clinical trial settings, but I presented, what I have published, and having always like the nuances about the applicability, in a clinical trial setting. So this is like very important. So it's like an hour or an hour and a half like interview. So it's like the first 20 minutes you go through your slides. So you want to be concise, you want to give them message, and they will ask you questions. And the second part will be more the soft skills. So it's like how you interact with your peers, with the metrics, and how you handle multiple taskings or multiple asks, like multiple project that you are in. So those kind of type of questions. And for the second question about the green card, I mean, probably depends really on the positions. Usually the small company are more reluctant for sponsoring someone. In my case, one of the question was, do you have the green card? I had it. So I mean, I don't want to like say that everyone's had the same are gonna have the same problem, but for me, in order to get the job, I really need to have a green card. So I really need to have a status. So, we are working in the same company, me and him, like it's a BMS, but I probably, again, it depends on the kind of positions, probably where he's working, like it's kind of the sponsor, but it's my experience. So, and I know that it's kind of tricky for international students.
Thank you, Francesca. Boaz, do you want to answer this question next?
Yeah, sure. Could you repeat the question briefly, please?
Sure. It's
sorry, just to make sure I'm answering.
Yeah. It's how did you prepare yourself for your first transition? What did the application and the interview process look like? And how did you convince the hiring managers or the company that you are the right fit for this job? And also about your immigration, if you had any experience with that.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I see a lot of questions like that in the chat as well about the strategy sort of to transition and what makes you marketable. I think one thing I really want to impress on everybody is that you have great skills. If you went through a PhD and a postdoc, yeah, you learn valuable things there. You don't just learn the skill of pipetting or of doing science, whatever that may be. You learn how to make decisions in the face of insecurity, to name just one thing that you've been doing for years. So do not have doubts about that. That's just something that I would want to give you. Also, nobody ticks all the boxes, never. And often when you look at vacancies, you can see 20 items that would be preferred if you would have done that. Well, nobody has done all 20. If you have, you would probably be applying for a different position. So keep that in mind. So what do you need to do? I would say know very well what you want. That is really the most important thing. Look a little bit into all these various roles and talk to people who are already there. That really helps a lot. Then you get a good idea whether that would be something for you and why you would want to do that, why you would want to go to that specific type of role. And then connect to people in the companies that you want to apply for. And certainly Taliana can help you with contacts and other people as well. I would say that there is not a specific course that you need to do or a skill that you need to train. You're not going to learn the job by doing a course. You have the basis of what you need to succeed in all the years of work that you've done. And you need to see if it's a good fit. Now, maybe one thing that I could say from my interviews, what really kind of stood out to me, and other people have said it already as well, is how important soft skills are. And now being at AstraZeneca, which is such a big company, I really see why that is, because you work in really large and really diverse teams. So it's really important that you are good in adjusting yourself to people with a very different background. So often you have to talk about science with people who don't have any scientific experience, but who have a very crucial role in the team. And often you need to talk to other teams who have no medical experience, but you need to talk to them about why certain decisions need to be made for patients. You need really good skills in communicating with people and in understanding why other people might think differently. And in my interviews, I constantly got questions like that. So how do you think what do you think a good team looks like? Have you ever been in a conflict situation and how did you resolve it? It sounds a little bit generic, but I would say try to think of times when you were in that position and of constructive ways in which you dealt with it. That is definitely important to bring across in interviews. And it's maybe the last thing, it's never too early to build relationships. So look at all the people that you already know in your LinkedIn and in your environment. And then you will discover that being where you are right now, you actually know a lot of people, and there are a lot of resources that can help you connect. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. All right, we have one final question in the panel discussion before we move on to the breakout rooms. If you have experience interviewing candidates applying for the roles on your team, what are the characteristics you look for when assessing a candidate? And Parthiv, would you like to answer this question, please?
Yeah, sure. So I will first say what do not and what we don't want to see and what we want to see. So very common thing that we even means maybe me also when I was giving first few interviews, that first question generally we get in an interview is tell us about yourself. And the problem that happens with someone coming with a PhD is that they tend to go too much into their research project with that question, like what publication they made, what molecules they were working on, what technical instruments they are using, and that takes up around 10-15 minutes of the interview, half an hour call, suppose. So that probably is not to do. That if someone asks the question, tell us about yourself, just keep it brief, 2-3 sentences on what you did, like a high level summary of say something to cure cancer or working with immunology and why you are interested in this position. So a 2-3 sentence answer is the main thing. And what we look for, especially for some entry-level position, because we know PhD or postdoc will not have the on-job experience that we need in the job. So that's expected when the interviewer is interviewing the candidate with a PhD fresh out of the lab. So the thing is mainly looking at the soft skills on if the person don't know it, how quickly or that person can pick up the things. That's the most important thing, because and also because every company provides training for whatever job they are being recruited. So it's very important that the person can learn the things quickly and master the art. So that's the soft skill we generally tend to look. That's a quick learner kind of thing. And of course, some match need to be there. Means whether it's a technical match, little bit like the people have idea on immunology or any field or something like that, or any internship kind of experience or any conference maybe. Means non-academic conference if the person has attended. So those things are the very few things that at least to have something to knock on the door. So those are the initial things that we try to look at while interviewing someone fresh out of the lab.
Thank you so much, Parthiv. I'm sure that's very useful to those attending the panel discussion today. Helen, would you also like to answer this question?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't have too much to add, and somebody just asked in the chat how you can judge whether somebody's like a quick learner. I think you can get a general sense of somebody's like general level of interest and, just how they are by just talking to them. And I think the best thing you can do is to, be not like overexcited, but, show interest and like be really engaged in the conversation on like an intellectual level. And I think that way, when you like, if they're telling you about like what their day's like, ask some really engaging questions about like follow-up questions about like what that means, dig deeper, that type of thing. And I think, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's one way to show that you're really engaged and you can, whatever you're talking about, you can extract the relevant and like important information from that and, keep an engaging conversation. So I think that's one way to kind of stand out. Yeah, and that's also what I've seen from previous interview candidates that I've seen come through that end up being offered the position. So I think, yeah, just be engaging.
Thank you, Helen. That's great to know. And I think with that, we wrap up the panel discussions. I'll hand over to Taliana.
Thank you so much, Sohini, and thank you to all of our panelists. This was a really great discussion, and I love the interaction in the chat as well. So now you have time to talk to the panelists more directly in the smaller groups. I am opening the breakout rooms right now. So you should see an option at the bottom of your screen to see that there are 6 breakout rooms available. Each panelist will go to the room that has their name listed as the name of the room and just go to any room that you want, stay there the whole time or go in between rooms. Since we're starting a bit late, I'll close the rooms around 6:30, maybe a couple minutes after 6:30. And just please continue to have conversations with all of the panelists there, and then we'll all come back here at the end. If you need help getting into a room, I'll stick around here in case you need any assistance with that. But I hope all of the panelists will be joining the room that has their name attached to it, and then all of you will be going into any rooms that interest you until I close the rooms around 6:30, maybe a few minutes after. Alrighty, it looks like some people are joining, and again, I'll stick around here in case anybody needs help getting into any of the rooms. Okay, for everyone who's still here, it looks like most people have joined the rooms. Whoever needs assistance, just let me know. I can assign you to a room directly. Okay. Looks like almost everybody has joined a room. Except for one person and the co-hosts. And I will